How to turn a billion-dollar empire into a high-tech prison. This is the tragic story of Howard Hughes, the man who had the world at his feet but chose to live in a darkened room, wrapped in tissues and haunted by his own mind. The abrupt transition of Howard Robert Hughes from an ambitious but relatively minor figure in the oil industry to one of the wealthiest men in America overnight remains one of the most astonishing pivots in 20th century history, a foundational event that armed a relentless financial freedom that would both fuel his genius and enable his madness. This transformation was not earned through his own labor, but delivered by the cruel hand of fate when his father Howard R. Hughes Sr. passed away suddenly in 1924. Leaving the 19-year-old college dropout with a controlling interest in the Hughes Tool Company. The true value of this inheritance lay not just in the company itself, but in a single, revolutionary invention: the two-cone rotary rock bit. Patented by Hughes Sr. in 1909, this deceptively simple device utilized interlocking, rotating cones with sharp teeth that were capable of drilling through hard rock formations, a capability that previous fishtail bits lacked, thereby vastly accelerating the process of extraction and opening up previously inaccessible geological areas. This invention was the indispensable engine of the Texas oil boom, as nearly every major oil drilling operation across the globe was compelled to pay steep royalties for its use. The constant demand, regardless of global economic fluctuations, generated a relentless, self-sustaining flow of immense untaxed wealth. The young Hughes, fresh from his studies at Rice University and Caltech, suddenly found himself controlling an empire whose profits were so vast and stable that they essentially formed an impregnable financial buffer, insulating him from the consequences of any future financial failure or eccentric passion. This immediate, unearned autonomy established a pattern for his life. He never had to court investors, answer to a board of directors, or temper his vision with financial pragmatism. He was, from that moment on, a law unto himself, able to indulge in any project, no matter how extravagant, risky, or technologically challenging simply. Because the Hughes rotary drill bit continued to pump out millions of dollars week after week, its vast inherited wealth was not merely capital. It was the ultimate license to pursue perfection without compromise, the golden ticket that propelled him out of the gritty oil fields and onto the glamorous yet ultimately fleeting stage of Hollywood. Before we delve deeper into the astonishing, yet ultimately tragic story of Howard Hughes' life, a tale spanning from the golden age of cinema and record-breaking aviation to his final years of paranoid seclusion, we would be remiss not to ask for your support. If this journey into the mind of a true American paradox captivates you, if the blend of genius and obsession is a story you believe needs to be shared, please take a moment to like this video. Subscribe to our channel for more meticulously researched historical content and share it with others. Your engagement is the fuel that allows us to continue bringing these complex, quality historical narratives to life, ensuring that the legacies of figures like Howard Hughes are analyzed and understood in their full, fascinating complexity. Armed with his unlimited financial war chest, the young oil tycoon made his audacious and seemingly irrational pivot to Hollywood. A move that baffled the conservative financial world, but perfectly encapsulated his restless perfectionist spirit. He didn't enter the film industry to merely bankroll projects. He came to control every aspect of production, treating the movie set as an engineering challenge that required absolute mastery, much like his father had treated the oil field. His obsession with cinematic perfection led him to risk an immense portion of his fortune, an act unheard of for an executive of his caliber to produce. Films like Hell's Angels 1930 and Scarface 1932. Hell's Angels, an epic WWI aerial combat drama, became a notorious production due to its technical demands and Hughes' refusal to accept anything less than historical and visual accuracy. He burned through directors and budgets, spent millions on real WWI aircraft, and even insisted on filming dangerous aerial sequences himself, leading to the deaths of several stunt pilots and mechanics. When sound film emerged mid-production, Hughes scrapped the entire silent version, reshooting 90% of the film, and personally overseeing the sound engineering. It's an unprecedented act that drove the budget to a staggering $2.8 million, a phenomenal sum for the era. The production of Scarface, though less financially ruinous, was equally defined by his relentless battle against the production code, the moral censorship body of the time. Obsessed with depicting the violent reality of the Chicago gang wars, Hughes fought tooth and nail to retain the film's dark edge and insisted on controversial reshoots to appease the censors, only to release the original, more visceral version later. He viewed the studio system and its inherent compromises as an affront to his artistic and technical standards. These projects were less about generating profit and more about proving a point. That a film like a machine could be built to perfect specifications, even if it meant bankrupting the traditional production model and challenging every established social and regulatory rule in the process. He operated under the self-belief that his wealth made him immune to the industry's constraints, fostering a reputation as a visionary maverick who simultaneously captivated and terrified the Hollywood establishment. The seemingly glamorous and successful run in Hollywood, however, was not the career pinnacle one might assume, and it was a singular failure, or perhaps a series of critical and commercial disappointments that made Hughes abruptly abandon the fleeting glamour of the movie business and shift his focus entirely to the mechanical obsession that had been his childhood fixation: aviation. Despite the eventual commercial success of Hell's Angels and the lasting critical legacy of Scarface, his overall tenure as a Hollywood mogul was fraught with legal battles, public scrutiny, and a string of box office duds, including The Outlaw, which became more famous for its censorship battles over Jane Russell's cleavage than its cinematic merit. Hughes was a technician first and an artist second, and the subjective nature of filmmaking, the reliance on human performance, and the inevitable compromise with censors proved to be deeply incompatible with his need for absolute, quantifiable control. A machine, unlike an actress or a script, obeyed physical laws. Its performance could be calculated, measured, and perfected. The shift was driven by a fundamental psychological need to move from the chaotic, unpredictable world of human drama back to the pure mathematical certainty of engineering. Aviation provided the ultimate crucible for this desire. The principles of lift, drag, and thrust were immutable. A plane either flew at a calculated speed, or it didn't. The results were objective, undeniable, and entirely the result of his own design and mechanical genius. He saw in aviation a realm where his wealth could not just buy a finished product, but could fund the fundamental innovation process itself, allowing him to bypass existing conventions and push the absolute limits of flight engineering. Hollywood was a distraction, an experiment in human control. But aviation was his destiny, a space where he could be both the designer and the daring test pilot, fusing his technical brilliance with his personal appetite for extreme risk and glory. The establishment of the Hughes Aircraft Company, initially nothing more than a small rented hangar and a workshop, signaled the critical transformation of Howard Hughes from a mere heir indulging in eccentric hobbies into a genuine, innovative engineer and test pilot, a figure who would leave an indelible mark on aerospace design. The company was founded not for mass production, but primarily as a vehicle for Hughes's personal design projects and his relentless pursuit of world records. His first major project was the H-1 Racer, a sleek, revolutionary aircraft designed to achieve absolute top speed. Hughes threw his engineering wealth at the problem, employing a small team of top engineers, led by Richard Palmer, whom he tasked with creating an aircraft that minimized drag to an unprecedented degree. The resulting H-1 was a marvel of aerodynamic refinement. It featured flush rivets, retractable landing gear, and carefully sealed joints to maintain a smooth, unbroken surface. And more crucially, it was designed with wings that were structurally integrated into the fuselage, eliminating the drag-inducing external wires and braces common on contemporary aircraft. On September 13, 1935, Hughes personally flew the H-1 to set a new world airspeed record of 352 tex miles per hour, smashing the previous record and nearly running out of fuel in the process. The H-1 Racer was not just a symbol of speed. It was a technological declaration that Hughes, the novice aircraft designer, was capable of out-engineering the largest aviation corporations in the world. He proved that he was not just funding the research, was intimately involved in the mathematical and physical challenges, donning the engineer's cap and the pilot's helmet simultaneously.
Oh.
This period marked the true ascent of his genius, where his financial power perfectly intersected with his technical mind and his reckless courage, cementing the image of him as a visionary who literally built the fastest machines of his time. The setting of the world speed record with the H-1 racer was merely the warm-up for Hughes, whose ultimate ambition was to transcend mere national records and solidify his image as the ultimate American hero through feats of global aviation. What truly drove him was an innate, almost desperate need for personal glory that could only be satisfied by risking his life in public spectacle. His next major undertaking was the 1938 global flight, dizzying 91-hour around-the-world journey that was a calculated attempt to beat the record set by the legendary Wiley Post. Hughes's meticulously planned flight in a Lockheed 14 Super Electra, modified with extensive fuel tanks and the latest in navigation technology, was a triumph of preparation, engineering, and sheer endurance. He assembled an elite hand-picked crew and executed the journey with such precision, including planned stops in Paris, Moscow, Omsk, Yakutsk, and Fairbanks, that he shaved more than 4 days off Post's record, completing the flight in just 3 days, 19 hours, and 17 minutes. The flight was more than a technical victory. It was a carefully curated media event. Hughes returned home to a ticker-tape parade in New York City, a spectacle that crowned him as the embodiment of American courage, ingenuity, and adventure, a figure rivaling Charles Lindbergh in the public imagination. He was the handsome, wealthy, and daring pilot who personified the American dream of limitless possibility. Crucially, the public's adoration was built on the perception of his self-made success and personal risk. Conveniently overlooking the inherited wealth that funded the entire enterprise, this era represented the zenith of Hughes's public life, the moment when his internal drive for perfection manifested as external. Universally lauded achievement, a golden age of glory that made the coming descent all the more tragic. The fiery crash of his experimental XF-11 spy plane on July 7, 1946, was the single most devastating and transformative event of Howard Hughes's life, a physical and psychological catastrophe that irrevocably altered his mind, his body, and his destiny, planting the terrifying, persistent seed of opiate addiction and paranoia that would define his final decades. The XF-11 was a cutting-edge twin-boom, high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft designed for the U.S. military. While on a test flight over Los Angeles, a propeller malfunctioned, forcing the massive prototype into a catastrophic, uncontrolled dive. Hughes, piloting the plane himself, attempted a desperate belly landing in a residential area of Beverly Hills. But the aircraft slammed into a house, burst into flames, and nearly killed him instantly. Rescuers found him severely mangled, suffering a crushed chest, a collapsed lung, numerous broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder, and multiple third-degree burns across his body. The immediate trauma was profound, but the long-term impact was terminal. His slow, agonizing recovery in the hospital necessitated massive doses of morphine and later codeine, the beginning of a lifelong, crippling addiction to opiates that would destroy his metabolism and cognitive function. More sinisterly, the crash seemed to exacerbate or perhaps even initiate the latent neurological symptoms of his obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, and germophobia. While convalescing, he developed bizarre rituals and an intense focus on the mechanics of his own body, which later morphed into a terrifying paranoia about germs, infection, and the outside world. The heroic aviator who once cheated death in the skies was now a man haunted by the fragility of his own body and dependent on painkillers. His technical genius, beginning its slow, tortured submission to chronic pain and crippling mental illness. Among all of Hughes's monumental, yet often misunderstood projects, the H-4, Hercules, universally nicknamed the Spruce Goose, stands as the most contested symbol of his life. Was it the ultimate folly of a madman? A massive, over-budget boondoggle, fueled by ego, or the unjustly maligned legacy of a visionary engineer, fighting against the cynical politics of Congress and a wartime government bureaucracy. Conceived during World War II as a massive troop and cargo transport that could circumvent German U-boat attacks by flying above the sea. The Attention flying boat was designed primarily from wood, specifically birch, not spruce, to conserve wartime, aluminum earning its famous misnomer. The project was plagued by budget overruns, delays, and political controversies, culminating in a highly publicized and politically charged Senate investigation led by Senator Owen Brewster, who accused Hughes of profiting from the war and incompetence. Hughes, interrupting his own recovery from the XF-11 crash, staged a dramatic, impassioned defense, not just of his integrity, but of his vision, asserting his commitment to the project, the pressure to prove his critics wrong, and the necessity of vindicating his technological ambition led to the Hercules' only flight. On November 2, 1947, during taxi tests in Long Beach Harbor, with a crowd of spectators and journalists watching, Hughes, without any prior warning to his crew, gunned the throttles and lifted the colossal machine, the largest flying boat ever built, into the air. It flew for a mere 26 seconds for a distance of about 1 mile, reaching an altitude of 70 feet, just enough to prove its critics wrong. It could fly. Yet, the aircraft never flew again. For the rest of his life, Hughes maintained the giant plane in a climate-controlled hangar at a cost of millions per year, a tangible, absurdly expensive monument to an unfulfilled vision. Beautiful, tragic symbol of a man whose technical genius was often undermined by his own inability to compromise or to finish what politics had derailed. While his aircraft projects garnered the headlines, Howard Hughes used Trans World Airlines TWA, an airline he effectively controlled for over 2 decades, as his ultimate sustained vehicle for technological ambition, pushing the industry forward with his insistence on performance and modernity, only to lose it due to his increasingly erratic hands-off and ultimately paranoid business tactics. Hughes acquired a controlling interest in TWA in the 1930s, not viewing it as a mere business, but as a living laboratory for the future of flight. He personally oversaw the design specifications of the airline's fleet, demanding better performance, greater luxury, and superior technology, most notably pushing the development of the revolutionary Lockheed Constellation. The Connie, with its distinctive triple tail and sleek fuselage, was a design Hughes personally dictated and funded, and it transformed a transcontinental flight in the post-war era, becoming a symbol of glamour and speed. However, as the 1950s advanced and the jet age dawned, the very eccentricity that had once allowed him to innovate began to cripple his management. His growing reclusiveness meant that vital, multi-million-dollar decisions were often delayed for months as executives struggled to get an audience with their unseen phantom boss, communicating only through layers of increasingly secretive and bizarre memos. He famously resisted the move to jet aircraft, fearing the technical challenges and perhaps projecting his own fear of rapid change onto his empire. The loss of TWA marked the precise, invisible line where Hughes' well-documented eccentricities transformed from the lovable quirks of a wealthy genius into a deliberate total withdrawal from the world, using his limitless wealth to construct a literal and figurative fortress of isolation against the outside. His shift was no longer merely about privacy or perfection. It was driven by a genuine, crippling fear of contamination and a deep-seated paranoia about the security of his person and his assets. He began to communicate exclusively through typed, meticulously edited memos, sometimes stretching to over 50 pages, which he would sign with an ink pad and tissue-wrapped fingers to avoid direct contact with any surface. He retreated into a succession of darkened, air-filtered penthouses and hotel suites, beginning a new phase of existence as a phantom CEO. He ceased all direct contact with the world, relying instead on a small cadre of hand-picked, trusted intermediaries. His wealth, once used to build the biggest plane and the fastest racer, was now deployed to engineer a sterile, perfectly controlled environment, a personal maximum security prison of his own design. This withdrawal was total. He stopped cutting his hair and nails, neglected his health, and subsisted on a bizarre diet. The public figure, the handsome aviator, and the dazzling film producer simply ceased to exist, replaced by a reclusive entity whose only real link to humanity was the constant execution of his strange, ever more demanding protocols. This period marked the irreversible triumph of his internal demons over his external ambition. Turning the master of the skies into a prisoner of the floor, the final dramatic move of his public life, his move to Las Vegas, is triggered by an incident so banal it underscores the extent of his psychological decline. A hotel's simple demand for him to check out, which initiated a secretive, paranoid, and financially staggering spree of acquiring casinos, land, and unprecedented control over the city itself. In 1966, Hughes moved into the penthouse of the Desert Inn Hotel, occupying the entire top floor. After months of his bizarre secretive occupation during which his staff ordered all windows to be sealed and covered and refused entry to housekeeping or maintenance, the hotel's owners, tired of the loss of lucrative penthouse revenue, politely requested that he leave. Hughes, unwilling to endure the disruption and psychological exposure of moving, made a characteristically extreme decision. He simply bought the Desert Inn for a reported $13.2 million. This impulsive purchase set off a 5-year, multi-million-dollar acquisition spree that fundamentally changed the face of Las Vegas. Operating under the highest levels of secrecy, Hughes and his agents acquired control of major casinos like the Sands, the Frontier, the Castaways, the Silver Slipper, and the Landmark. He was motivated partly by a desire for secure, private living spaces within the city, but also by a deep-seated paranoia about the city's organized crime elements. He viewed his acquisitions as a personal crusade to sanitize and legitimize Las Vegas, using his vast wealth to essentially buy a protective psychological shield. By the early 1970s, he had become the single largest private employer and landowner in Nevada. The city was, in a very real sense, run from his darkened, tissue-wrapped command center. This spree demonstrated the last vestiges of his executive power, turning an entire city into an extension of his fortress. All because he was too fearful of the outside world to simply switch hotels. Beyond mere eccentricity, the terrifying reality of his later life was the manifestation of a severe, debilitating obsessive-compulsive disorder. OCD, a condition that dictated his every move, required complex, time-consuming rituals and turned simple human contact into a terrifying, infectious threat, forcing him to live in a perpetual state of psychological siege. His OCD was centered around a near-pathological germophobia, or mysophobia, which amplified his need for perfect sterility to an astronomical degree. He believed that any contact with another human being, as skin, breath, or even a foreign object, carried with it the threat of deadly infection. This fear manifested in extraordinary ritualistic behavior. His most famous protocol involved the use of paper tissues. He would not touch a doorknob, a telephone, or even his own notes without first wrapping his hand in multiple layers of Kleenex. Any object passed to him, even by his trusted staff, had to undergo an elaborate, precise sequence of wrapping in tissue paper and passing through multiple stages of sterile containers. Instructions to his staff included precise, multi-step directions for the handling of common objects, such as the exact number of times a jar lid should be screwed on and off. He developed complex numerical patterns, requiring actions to be performed 3, 5, or 15 times. The contamination extended to food. He demanded that cans of food be wiped down with alcohol before being opened, and he would only eat specific, repetitive meals, such as canned chicken soup. This was not simply a quirk of a rich man. It was a devastating psychological disorder that consumed his mental energy, transforming every waking moment into a grueling meticulous performance aimed at keeping the perceived infectious threat of the outside world at bay, a life entirely governed by the fear of an invisible enemy. As his world shrank to the confines of his darkened penthouse, a highly selective, secretive staff, often referred to by the press and insiders as the Mormon Mafia, became Howard Hughes' only conduit to the outside world, executing his bizarre, non-negotiable demands and managing his sprawling multi-billion-dollar empire entirely unseen by its owner. The staff, predominantly members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints Mormons, were chosen for their reputation for sobriety, discretion, trustworthiness, and, crucially, their communal discipline, which ensured they would adhere strictly to Hughes's complex protocols without question or complaint. Figures like Robert Maheu, his chief executive officer, and later the rotating personal aides who lived in the suites adjacent to him, were the only links between the master recluse and his vast holdings, which included TWA until its loss, Hughes, aircraft, and his burgeoning Las Vegas properties. Their job was often absurd. They managed hotel acquisitions, government contracts, and the details of his codeine consumption, all while adhering to the extreme sterility protocols. Communication was often done via handwritten notes slipped under doors or through lengthy typed memos that the staff had to meticulously check for inconsistencies. They were charged with executing his strange, often impulsive demands, from tracking down obscure, decades-old movies for him to watch repetitively, to ensuring the exact temperature and precise brand of ice cream was always available. The Mormon Mafia were not merely servants. They were the essential, loyal gatekeepers of his sanity and his empire, ensuring that the machine of Hughes's wealth continued to operate effectively, even as its engineer was succumbing to his own internal collapse. A perfect demonstration of how absolute wealth could, by total isolation and executive functionality simultaneously. As his isolation became total and his existence devolved into a perpetual medical and psychological crisis, the once dashing, impeccably dressed aviator transformed into a harrowing, tragic figure addicted to codeine, his body ravaged by neglect, and his mind consumed by his own spiraling obsessions. By the mid-1970s, Hughes was little more than a ghost. He would spend months, sometimes years, entirely isolated in a single room, often moving from Las Vegas to the Bahamas, and then to Mexico, using the cover of darkness and immense security to execute the moves. His codeine addiction, often self-administered through daily injections, reached colossal, debilitating levels, causing his physical appearance to deteriorate shockingly. His body, once lean and muscular from his years of flying and engineering, was reduced to a skeleton weighing barely 90 pounds. His hair was long and matted, his beard untrimmed. His fingernails were allowed to grow into long, terrifying talons, a shocking testament to his absolute lack of personal care and his refusal to allow anyone near him. His diet became laughably small and repetitive, resulting in severe malnutrition. His mind, once a powerhouse of technical and entrepreneurial brilliance, was increasingly clouded by the opiate dependency and the non-stop, exhausting demands of his OCD. The world of Howard Hughes was no longer about conquering gravity or breaking records. It was about the next dose of codeine and the next ritualistic check against contamination. He had used his wealth to buy total freedom, yet that freedom had resulted in a state of self-imposed, gilded imprisonment, a final, cruel irony that saw the man who mastered the fastest machines in the world come hopelessly trapped inside his own failing body and tormented mind. The tragic end for the world, his most famous pilot, arrived not in a blaze of glory or a public spectacle, but in a secretive, desperate, and ultimately undignified flight out of Mexico, a final journey where he was so physically ravaged that he was virtually unrecognizable from the heroic figure of his youth. In early 1976, Hughes was residing in a hotel in Acapulco, Mexico, his health rapidly deteriorating to a critical state, exacerbated by advanced kidney failure and malnutrition. His small, panic-stricken inner circle made the decision to rush him back to the United States for emergency medical attention. On April 5, 1976, he was secretly loaded onto an unmarked jet, embarking on a final, desperate flight to the Methodist Hospital in Houston, Texas. He never made it to the hospital conscious. He died mid-flight or shortly after landing, with the official time of death recorded upon arrival in Houston on April 5th. The scene at the hospital was one of profound shock. The body that arrived was that of an emaciated, long-haired and bearded man with broken hypodermic needles still lodged in his arms. His appearance so drastically different from the public image that the FBI initially had to use fingerprints to positively confirm his identity. The man who had once graced the covers of magazines as the quintessential American Idol. The millionaire maverick who dazzled Hollywood and redefined aviation was reduced to a frail, unrecognizable husk. The autopsy revealed the underlying causes: malnutrition, chronic pain, and a toxic level of codeine in his system, a definitive confirmation that his death was the culmination of decades of self-neglect and opiate dependency. Quiet, horrifying conclusion to a life lived in the loudest, most spectacular way possible. In the end, the true and complex legacy of Howard Hughes remains stubbornly unresolved, a paradox eternally debated. Should he be remembered as the undisputed genius who flew higher, engineered faster, and built bigger, the visionary pioneer whose wealth funded genuine American innovation, or as the tragic American Icarus who ultimately flew too close to the sun of his own unbridled ambition and personal demons, whose greatest creation was his own crippling isolation? He left behind an empire that included Hughes aircraft, which would go on to become a major defense and technology contractor, responsible for innovations that shaped the modern aerospace industry, proving that his technical mind was indeed ahead of its time. He indelibly marked the history of both Hollywood and Las Vegas, financing masterpieces and reshaping an entire city. Yet, the enduring image is of the man in the darkened room, a recluse consumed by his fear of germs and his addiction to painkillers. His life serves as the most potent cautionary tale about the corrosive power of absolute wealth combined with unchecked mental illness. He had the means to buy anything, except perhaps happiness, health, or a cure for his own mind. Howard Hughes did not die because he ran out of money, but because he ran out of psychological control. His story is the definitive narrative of the American eccentric, a figure who leveraged the vast, dark rivers of the Texas oil economy to achieve a spectacular, self-destructive form of perfection, forever casting a long, complex shadow over the intersection of wealth, genius, and madness in the 20th century. He was the man who had the world at his fingertips only to choose to live in a room wrapped in Kleenex, forever proving that the greatest machines he ever built, his films, his planes, his empire, could not save him from himself.